Millions are watching as Jasmine Crockett rips open Ivanka Trump's 40-year lie, exposing her true identity with tapes and DNA that can't be denied. History is repeating itself, but this time, will America watch a dynasty burn? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The hearing room of the United States Congress was frozen in silence. 20 million Americans watched live, their screens glowing as the cameras zoomed in. The air was ice cold, the kind that makes every heartbeat sound louder. Only the soft clicks of cameras and the rustle of papers broke the stillness like distant thunder before a storm. At the center, Jasmine Crockett sat rigid, her eyes locked forward. In front of her lay a small cassette sealed in a scarred metal box, ordinary in size but heavy with menace. Every reporter knew it could detonate a political bomb. Across from her sat Ivanka Trump in a pristine white dress, chin-high lips curled in a faint smirk, her gaze daring anyone to question her bloodline. Jasmine leaned toward the microphone, her voice sharp as a blade. Today it will not be me who speaks, it will be those who once stood beside Donald Trump. And America will hear every word. The chamber was holding its breath, every eye locked on the battered cassette lying on the desk. Jasmine reached forward with steady hands, pressed the button, and the machine came alive with a low, menacing hiss. Static filled the air for a heartbeat, and then a voice emerged, slow, deliberate, dripping with dread. It was Roy Cohn, the ruthless attorney, who once defended mob bosses, mentored Donald Trump, and built a career on fear. His words sliced through the silence. Never let Ivanka know the truth. That girl, she does not carry Trump's blood. The room gasped as one. A shiver ran across the chamber, the kind that comes when history is suddenly rewritten before your eyes. Democratic lawmakers clutched their heads, eyes wide in disbelief. Across the aisle, Republican senators shot to their feet, red-faced and furious. One slammed his fist against the table and roared, "Fake, this is slander." Their anger filled the chamber, but their voices cracked with panic. Reporters sprang to life, camera shutters firing like gunfire, every flash freezing faces of shock and fear. At the center, Ivanka Trump was losing control. Her face drained pale, the flawless composure she wore like armor crumbling away. Her fingers clutched the microphone so tightly her knuckles turned white, yet her hands shook. Then she screamed, her voice sharp and frantic. "This is a deep fake, cheap technology, nothing more." The cry rang hollow, trembling with desperation. But the ghostly voice of Roy Cohn still echoed, undeniable, impossible to silence. Jasmine sat motionless, her eyes locked on Ivanka. Then with deliberate calm, she raised her hand toward the doors. They opened and a man in a dark suit stepped in, silver hair catching the light. The clerk announced him as a senior FBI audio specialist. Reporters lunged forward, cameras snapping furiously. He lifted a sealed evidence bag, then spoke with authority that cut through the chaos. "This tape is authentic. It was recorded in 1987. There has been no manipulation." His words struck like hammer blows. The chamber erupted once more, louder and angrier. Democrats shouted for an inquiry, voices clashing in outrage. Republicans barked accusations of political theater, their fists pounding. The press gallery was a frenzy, headlines being written in real time. But beneath all the fury, the first undeniable crack had appeared. Roy Cohn had spoken. Ivanka Trump was not of Trump's blood, and the storm had only begun. The uproar from Roy Cohn's first revelation was still echoing when the tape rolled forward, static flaring once more. The tape hissed again, the sound gritty and raw, and then Roy Cohn's voice returned. The chamber leaned forward, every ear straining. This time the recording was clearer, heavier, as if every word had been dipped in iron. Cohn wasn't speaking abstractly. He was speaking directly to Donald Trump, his client, the man he had shaped in the ruthless politics of New York. His voice, calm but full of warning, filled the hall. Donald the girl was brought to America through an arrangement with the Navs family in Slovenia. It was a trade for favors, for opportunities. But if this ever comes out, you will lose everything. The air in the chamber cracked like glass. The name Donald hung in the air like a thunderclap. Senators jolted upright, realizing this was no distant rumor. It was Cohn speaking directly to Trump himself, laying out a secret too toxic to ever reach daylight. The mention of the Navs family sent a ripple of recognition through the room. drawing a direct line to Melania Trump's bloodline. Democrats covered their mouths, their eyes wide with shock, while Republicans roared in fury, trying to shout the words back into silence. Fake manufactured, one Republican bellowed, pounding his fist against the wood. Another shouted, "This is political theater," but their rage could not mask the fear tightening in their voices. The chamber dissolved into chaos, the shouts of senators colliding with the relentless burst of camera flashes. Reporters fired off questions, their cameras strobing the room with blinding light, every frozen frame capturing disbelief, denial, and fear. In the middle of it all, Jasmine Crockett stayed immovable, her face set in stone. She reached calmly into her folder, pulling out a crisp legal document, and raised it high so the cameras could catch the official seal. Her voice cut through the uproar like a razor. "This is a certified record from the New York Supreme Court, dated 1987. It confirms Roy Cohn was Donald Trump's lead attorney during this period. The connection was undeniable. The man on the tape was the same man who sat at Trump's side, guiding him through legal wars. His voice was not speculation. It was history speaking." Across the table, Ivanka Trump faltered. The composure that had cloaked her cracked apart, her lips trembling. Her voice slipped out in a broken whisper, barely audible, but carried by the microphone to millions watching live. "No, this can't be." The chamber froze for a second, the sound of her denial hanging in the air like a confession of fear. Her eyes darted, searching for allies, but none came to her rescue. Jasmine leaned forward, her gaze sharp, her voice slow and merciless. "You can deny me, but you cannot deny the voice of the man who sat at your father's table every night." The line cut through Ivanka like a blade, and the chamber exploded once more into shouting chaos and flashing lights. The tape was still rolling. The storm had only begun. The uproar from Roy Cohn's revelation had barely settled when the tape clicked forward again, the static crawling through the speakers like the sound of something buried clawing its way back to the surface. Then a new voice broke through, lower, rougher, and instantly recognizable. It was the unmistakable voice of Donald Trump, but not the booming confidence the world knew. This was a younger Trump, his tone ragged, shaking, with fear carrying the weight of a secret too dangerous to admit. The chamber froze as his words filled the hall. "Roy, this must be buried. Ivanka must never know. That girl is not mine. If this ever comes out, I lose everything." The effect was nuclear. Senators leapt to their feet, the chamber exploding in shock and chaos. One Democratic lawmaker slammed his palm against the table and shouted over the noise. He just admitted it. The words ricocheted through the chamber like a gunshot. In the press gallery, reporters were already hammering headlines into their keyboards, their screens glowing with breaking alerts: Trump's confession, Ivanka not his child. Camera flashes turned the room into a storm of white light, every click capturing the stunned faces of those who had just heard the impossible. Across the table, Ivanka Trump shattered. The mask of icy composure that had clung to her all morning was gone in an instant. Tears welled in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks as she lurched forward, gripping the microphone like a lifeline. Her scream tore through the roar of the chamber. "No, my father would never say that." Her voice cracked, her body shaking, as though the words themselves had burned through her armor. The cameras caught everything: her collapse, her denial, her desperate clinging to a truth that had just been ripped away. Jasmine Crockett did not blink. She sat steady in her chair, the storm raging around her, her expression cold, sharp, unyielding. Then she leaned forward, her voice low but carrying, slicing the air with every syllable. Her words landed like iron hammers, heavy and undeniable. "The American people just heard the voice of Donald J. Trump. This is not speculation. This is the truth." Each word hit the chamber like a strike, silencing pockets of noise, forcing attention back onto the simple, brutal reality now echoing through the speakers. The room trembled with the weight of it. For the first time, there was no escape, no spin, no plausible deniability. The confession had come not from rumor, not from enemies, not from speculation, but from Donald Trump himself. The voice on that tape had shattered the walls of protection built around Ivanka, and the nation had just watched those walls collapse live in real time. And the tape was still playing. The storm was only intensifying. As the last echo of the confession thinned, the room split down the middle. Democratic members surged to their microphones, voices tight and urgent, demanding an immediate investigation. Across the aisle, Republicans rose in a wave of fury, shouting political trap, until the words beat like drums against the walls. One pointed a finger at the dais and swore the hearing had become a circus designed to smear a family name. The gallery crackled with camera shutters, the air flickering in strobe as headlines were drafted live. Jasmine waited for the noise to crest, then tapped the remote, and the screen behind her flared to life. A slide filled the monitors, Ivanka in the White House, poised in the advisor's chair, the caption in stark black letters, position built on a fabricated surname. Gasps rolled through the rows as the image lingered, unblinking, brutal in its simplicity. Jasmine let the silence sharpen, then said, voice steady, that titles built on deception corrode public trust. Reporters leaned forward to capture the frame, while aides whispered that the picture alone could swing opinion. The contrast between the polished photograph and the raw tape gnawed at the chamber like a saw. Ivanka leaned toward the mic, eyes wet but blazing, and fired back, I worked. I deserve it. The sentence hung there, brittle as glass, daring the room to break it. Jasmine did not blink. She stepped closer, every word deliberate, every pause a verdict. If you deserve it, why did your family hide it for 40 years? The question detonated in the hush, sending a visible shudder across the benches as the picture on the screen refused to look away. For a heartbeat, the chamber felt airless, the kind of quiet when the next truth is cornered with nowhere left to run. The shouting had barely died when Jasmine reached down and pulled out a golden envelope, its flap sealed shut with a lump of red wax stamped decades ago. The sight of it alone sent ripples through the chamber. Every lawmaker, every journalist, every camera turned toward her hand. She raised it above her head for all to see, the envelope gleaming under the hot lights. Her voice cut through the din, slow and deliberate. This is irrefutable evidence. The words fell like a gavel strike. The room stilled for a single heartbeat, and then Jasmine tore through the wax with a sharp crack. The sound snapped across the marble walls, and it felt like the chamber itself was holding its breath. From inside, she pulled a plastic-sleeved document. The edges of the paper yellowed, its typewriter ink still bold. She unfolded it with surgical care and slid it onto the projector. The monitors behind her lit up with the scan larger than life. At the very top, bold black letters announced Mount Sinai Hospital. Department of Genetics, 1982. Beneath that, lines of data stretched across the page, official, clinical, and merciless. The camera zoomed in until the words filled every screen across America. The first line blazed, name Ivanka K. Trump newborn. The second line followed like a hammer drop result. No biological relationship to Donald J. Trump. Gasps tore through the chamber. Reporters bolted upright, their phones glowing, typing furiously to blast the revelation across the world. Camera shutters fired in frantic succession, each flash capturing the same lines again and again, Ivanka's name, Trump's name, and the damning verdict between them. At the bottom of the page, the obstetrician's signature curved in black ink next to the raised seal of Mount Sinai Hospital, pressed deep into the paper fibers. It was unshakable. It was final. The chamber convulsed. One Democratic senator clapped a hand to his forehead and whispered, "My God." A Republican erupted, slamming his palm against the table, spitting the word forgery. Another simply leaned back, staring at the ceiling as though the weight of the moment had crushed him. Every reaction was caught frozen in the relentless light of the cameras. At the table, Ivanka Trump broke. Her shoulders buckled and she slumped backward into her chair. The microphone slipped from her hand, clattered across the desk, and rolled to the floor with a hollow metallic rattle. Her eyes stared blankly forward, glazed and distant, as if she had been hollowed out in an instant. The woman who once carried the Trump name as a shield now looked stripped of everything, her identity erased by a single sheet of paper. Jasmine lifted the DNA report higher, tilting it so the hospital seal caught the light, its ridges glinting for the cameras. She took a long breath and then read aloud, her voice carrying with perfect clarity to the chamber and the millions watching at home. From the moment Ivanka was born, Donald Trump knew, and he chose to hide it. Silence fell heavy and absolute before the room exploded once again. But this time the fury, the denial, the shouting, all of it was powerless against the black and white verdict staring back from the screen. The truth was out, and it had a seal, a signature, and a date. The roar of voices still echoed from the DNA revelation when Jasmine leaned forward in her chair. The chamber was electric, buzzing like a live wire, but her gaze cut through the chaos and locked on Ivanka. The cameras zoomed in, catching every flicker of tension in her face. Slowly, with deliberate calm, Jasmine spoke into the microphone. Her tone was steady, sharp, merciless. "You are not guilty for your bloodline, but you are guilty for deceiving a nation." The words rolled across the chamber, each syllable deliberate, each pause heavy, and the silence that followed was sharper than any shout. Ivanka's body trembled as the sentence sank in. The tears she had tried to hold back broke loose, streaming down her cheeks in hot, chaotic lines. She lurched forward, slamming her palms against the table, her voice bursting from her throat like a wound torn open. "He raised me. I am his daughter." She screamed, her words cracking under the weight of desperation. The microphones amplified the rawness of her cry, blasting it out to millions of homes across America. In that moment, the polished image of control and elegance she had curated for decades was gone, shattered under the pressure of truth. Jasmine didn't move. Her expression was stone, her eyes steady, and her voice came again slower this time, a blade sliding deeper. "No one takes that from you. The tape took it. The DNA took it. The truth is not on your side." The words hit the chamber like a gavel smashing marble. Even the loudest voices on the floor faltered, the shouts shrinking into murmurs. The sentence carried a finality that pressed on every chest in the room. The cameras closed in on Ivanka. Every major network was live, and the feed broadcast her face to millions of screens across the country. The image was devastating, mascara streaking down her cheeks, her lips trembling, her eyes wide and glassy, her whole expression collapsing in real time. It wasn't just a woman crying. It was the unraveling of a symbol, a dynasty cracking before the nation's eyes. Viewers in living rooms, diners, and offices leaned closer to their televisions, transfixed by the spectacle of power turned into ruin. In the gallery, reporters pounded at their keyboards, headlines already taking shape. "Ivanka crumbles under DNA revelation." Photographers leaned over the rail to catch every angle of her collapse. The bright flashes seared her face into history, preserving the exact moment when she fell apart before the world. Lawmakers shifted uncomfortably, some looking away, others staring in cold fascination, as though unable to decide whether they were watching tragedy or justice. Jasmine didn't speak again. She didn't need to. Her words had landed her, evidence had spoken, and the cameras were doing the rest. Ivanka sat there shaking, broken, the nation watching, as the image of a daughter was stripped bare by the weight of undeniable truth. The confrontation had reached its breaking point, but the fallout was just beginning. The chamber still vibrated from Ivanka's breakdown when the first shouts erupted from the floor. Democratic lawmakers surged forward to their microphones, their voices sharp, their demands unmistakable. They wanted a formal investigation into fraud and political identity. The words cut through the air like a blade, echoing from wall to wall. Members of the press leaned forward instantly, scribbling notes, typing furiously, some already whispering to their editors that this moment was about to redefine congressional history. On the other side of the aisle, Republicans shouted back with rage, calling it a witch hunt, pounding their fists against desks so hard that papers scattered into the air. The chamber wasn't just divided, it was shaking apart. Outside, the fury was spilling onto the streets. Protesters filled the wide avenues leading up to the Capitol steps, their chants pounding like war drums. Cardboard signs and banners rose above the sea of people, the words painted in thick black strokes that were impossible to ignore. "Tell the truth, Ivanka." The crowd moved as one, surging and shouting, their voices carrying far beyond the stone walls of Congress. Police sirens blared in the distance, barricades groaned against the pressure of bodies pressing forward, and television crews swarmed every corner to beam the chaos across the nation. The sound of the protest was a living roar, a second storm raging outside to mirror the one inside. Across America, millions of viewers sat frozen, eyes wide, trying to process what they were witnessing. The shock had turned to anger, and the anger to disbelief. Phone lines lit up on talk shows, radios buzzed with frantic callers, and social media feeds detonated with hashtags. It wasn't just politics anymore. It was betrayal. Neighbors muttered to one another in diners, old men shook their heads in barber shops, and families whispered around dinner tables. The Trump dynasty, built on power and image, was collapsing like a sandcastle swept away by the tide. The trust that once seemed untouchable was dissolving in real time. And then, as if summoned by the chaos, Donald Trump himself appeared. The giant screen behind the dais flickered, and his face filled the chamber via video call. His complexion was flushed, his hair disheveled, his jaw working with fury. He leaned toward the camera, his voice booming through the speakers with the old familiar rage. "That DNA is fake. This is a witch hunt." The words bellowed across the room, and for a moment even his allies seemed caught between relief at his defiance and fear of the storm that still surrounded him. Reporters pounced on the soundbite, instantly knowing it would ricochet across every news outlet within seconds. But Jasmine Crockett was ready. She didn't flinch at his rage, didn't let his booming voice rattle her composure. Calmly, deliberately, she reached into her folder again and pulled out another document. She placed it flat on the table, slid it toward the projector, and the screen shifted. A second report filled the monitors, stamped in bold at the top, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Forensic Division 1990. Her voice was clear and cutting as she addressed the chamber. This was an independent confirmation of the DNA results cataloged and archived decades earlier. The FBI seal glared from the page like a brand of fire. Jasmine lifted her eyes to the cameras and let the words land. The evidence had been verified not once, but twice. The reaction was seismic. The chamber erupted again, but this time the balance had shifted. The Democrats rose, higher voices pounding the demand for accountability. The Republicans shouted still, but their arguments cracked, their faces paling, as the FBI seal glared down on them. The press gallery was an earthquake of movement. Reporters stood, shouted into phones, dictated breaking lines that would hit the airwaves in minutes. Outside, the protesters roared louder, shaking their signs in unison, as if the Capitol itself could hear them. On the screen, Donald Trump's face twisted. The anger was still there, but it was tinged now with something else: panic. His mouth opened and closed, words spilling but no longer commanding. The audio cracked as he shouted over the chaos, his voice raw. "Guttural DNA, Jo Gia Jai Lassen Fu Tui." His sudden burst of Vietnamese, clumsy, desperate, staggered even his own supporters. It was incoherent, jumbled, the outburst of a man cornered with nowhere to turn. Laughter broke from the Democratic side. Reporters blinked in disbelief, and the control Trump once wielded over every narrative evaporated in the air. And then came the family. Cameras swiveled to catch them on the floor behind Ivanka, every face a mirror of the dynasty breaking apart. Donald Jr. seethed, his fists clenched, his face red, as he leaned toward aides and barked with fury. His lips curled with words the microphones couldn't catch, but his expression spoke clearly: rage without direction, fire with no weapon left. Eric Trump sat hunched, his head bowed, refusing to meet the cameras. His silence was louder than any outburst, his posture that of a man who knew the truth and could not bear to defend it. And Melania Trump, poised and polished for so many years, turned her face away from the cameras entirely. She shifted behind her hair, dodging every lens, refusing to meet the gaze of a nation that was demanding answers. Her silence, her avoidance, carried its own damning weight. The feed poured into every household, every bar, every phone in America. Viewers saw not just a hearing, but a family unraveling, a dynasty fracturing live on screen. Conversations sparked everywhere: neighbors on porches, colleagues in office kitchens, strangers at gas stations. The words circled again and again, whispered in disbelief, shouted in anger, repeated until they felt like prophecy. The Trump empire is collapsing from the inside. The chamber was still alive with shouting, the streets still boiling with protest, the nation still roaring in disbelief. Yet through it all, the image that lingered was not just Jasmine holding the FBI report or Ivanka breaking under the weight of truth. It was the sight of an empire crumbling one denial at a time, under the light of cameras that refused to blink. And this time, no one could look away. The chamber was still vibrating with fury when the chairman lifted his gavel high. He struck it hard against the block, the sound cracking through the chaos like a gunshot. The shouting stopped for a heartbeat, the tension collapsing into silence. His voice, heavy and deliberate, echoed across the room. This committee will authorize a formal investigation. The words landed with the force of an earthquake. Gasps rippled through the crowd, aides clutched their papers, and reporters erupted into a frenzy of typing. The announcement carried more than procedure. It was the line in the sand, the official step that transformed suspicion into a national reckoning. The cameras shifted at once, zeroing in on Jasmine Crockett. She rose from her chair with steady composure, her figure framed by the blinding white lights and the chaos behind her. She placed her hands on the table, then looked straight into the lens of the broadcast camera. For a long moment, she said nothing, letting the silence weigh heavier than any gavel. Then, with voice sharp and unshakable, she declared, "Su that hong so an sang, va hom nai an sang, I thok ben han dan mi." The Vietnamese words rolled through the chamber, translated instantly on screens across the country. The truth does not fear the light, and today that light belongs to the American people. It was not just a line. It was a verdict, a rallying cry, a phrase already destined for history books. The audience watching at home leaned closer to their screens. Old men in diners set down their coffee cups. Women sitting in living rooms with their grandchildren clutched the arms of their chairs. Across the nation, millions of Americans aged 50 and older felt the echo of a memory they thought was long buried. For them, this wasn't just a scandal, it was déjà vu. They remembered the Watergate hearings, the grainy black and white images of Nixon's downfall, the same crack in the facade of untouchable power. And as Jasmine spoke, they shuddered, whispering to one another in disbelief. History is repeating itself. Heads shook slowly, not in surprise but in sorrow, as if a wound they thought had healed was being torn open again. Inside the chamber, Ivanka Trump sat frozen. Her face was streaked with tears, her breathing shallow and uneven, her posture crumbling. The weight of the evidence, the tapes, the DNA, the FBI report pressed on her like 1,000 stones. She reached for the microphone, but her hand faltered. Finally, with trembling fingers, she shoved it aside. The microphone fell against the wood with a hollow thud, the sound amplified by silence. For a second, no one moved. Then Ivanka pushed herself to her feet, her legs unsteady, her shoulders hunched. She staggered backward, one hand catching the table for balance, mascara streaking down her cheeks. The cameras never looked away. They followed her every step as she lurched down the aisle, blinded by flashes that captured her collapse in merciless clarity. Her heels scraped against the marble floor, echoing like the steps of exile. She didn't speak. She couldn't. Her face said everything: anguish, humiliation, the crushing realization that the name she carried like armor had turned to ash. Reporters shouted her name, their questions colliding in the air, but she pressed forward through the noise, tears blurring her vision. She shoved open the chamber doors and stumbled into the hallway beyond her image, still projected on every screen inside. That image became immortal in seconds. The networks replayed it over and over, the daughter of Donald Trump, broken weeping, leaving the chamber, stripped of certainty, stripped of identity. Anchors gave it a name before the broadcast even ended. The day Ivanka lost the Trump name. The words burned across chyrons in red and black headlines, flashing across every corner of the country. Newspapers would print it in bold the next morning. Protesters outside would chant it into the night. It was no longer just a hearing, it was a symbol. The chamber itself seemed to hold the moment in suspension. Lawmakers sat stunned, their faces pale. Some scribbled notes, some whispered to aides, but most simply stared at the doors Ivanka had vanished through. The press gallery hummed like a hive, cameras, still rolling, keyboards still rattling. Every second of footage was already racing down wires to every home in America, to every cafe, to every bar where televisions hung above crowded tables. For the older generation, the parallels were unavoidable. In 1973, they had watched John Dean turn on Nixon. They had seen the moment power cracked under the weight of truth. Now, 50 years later, they were watching it again. Different names, different faces, but the same betrayal, the same collapse. In diners across the Midwest, men in trucker hats muttered, "This is Watergate all over again." In suburban kitchens, couples whispered, "We've been here before." The weight of history pressed down on them, a reminder that power, no matter how untouchable, could always break. Back in the chamber, Jasmine Crockett remained standing. She hadn't moved since delivering her line. She knew, as everyone in the room knew, that the moment was bigger than her, bigger than Ivanka, bigger even than Donald Trump. The cameras lingered on her face, capturing the steady resolve in her eyes, the calm certainty of someone who had not just exposed a lie, but rewritten the course of history in a single morning. The gavel struck again, the chairman calling the session to recess. But the noise in the chamber didn't die. It grew, voices clashing, aides scrambling, reporters rushing for the exits. The hearing had ended, but the story had only just begun. The echoes of Jasmine's words still rang, Ivanka's collapse still looped on screens, and America, stunned and shaken, understood that the dynasty that once seemed unbreakable had been shattered in the light. And outside, the chants only grew louder, thundering up the steps of the Capitol. Tell the truth, Ivanka. Tell the truth. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.